Hey people, how you doing? Nice to see you, figuratively speaking. Right, okay, I've got to say, welcome to Sports Therapy Association podcast. We'll get that first of all, so you know where you are and what you're listening to. It's a video cast, okay? We do it live, just in case you're joining us for the first time. And tonight, because it's the start of a massive topic, the subject of sleep, then we're going out live, not just to the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel, but also to the My Run Chat Live Facebook page as well, because it's a topic which is going to be of interest to everybody, whether you're a runner or not, whether you're a sports therapist, personal trainer, whether you're just if you're a human being and beyond, this will be of interest to you, anybody who can understand it. I'm going to apologize now. I have got COVID and I am a bit foggy. I had that tasting today, just earlier on. I tweeted about it. Crazy. I had some mayo and some mustard, and honestly, I've never felt so repulsed in my life by anything. And I've smelt and tasted some pretty repulsive stuff. I've traveled. I'm a learned man. Really, every cell in my body sort of, and I was like, geez, that's strange. And no one else in the family obviously reacted. And yeah, just those two things at the moment. But hey, if that's all I'm going to suffer, then I've got nothing to worry about at all, apart from just being even a little bit more vague than normal. So bear with me if you can. If you are joining us live, then you're welcome to write comments. And the joy of joining us live is when you do ask questions or write comments, then I can bring them up on the screen. You can ask our guests questions as well, so you're welcome to do that, whether you're in YouTube, whether you're from Facebook. Maybe say where you are joining me from, so I've got a little idea to give you an idea. Then here we go. Becky Carroll, as always, is first in the room, and Becky says, oh no, get better soon, my kids are off with it too. Hey, there's so many people with it now. Unfortunately, touch wood, as far as I know, it's kind of the weak. I've definitely got the weakest variant, I'm sure, because I know a lot of people are far worse off than me, and there's people still suffering long-term consequences of the original one, which is horrific. So yeah, I'm really not moaning about it. It's not as bad as man flu, so that puts it kind of into state. So thanks, Becky, for joining us and being in here. Leslie is here as well. Leslie Campbell, get well soon, Matt. So nice. This is such not a sample population of normal people, because you're all kind of being really empathetic with me and saying get well soon. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much. So I'm blabbing on already. Yes, the Sports Therapy Association podcast, and every month we take a focus point. As I've said already, it's going to be Sleep Awareness Month this month of April, and I'm really excited about it in selfish ways, because I've struggled with sleep all my life since a baby, and so it's something which really affects me personally. Again, not as much as a lot of other people, but I'm with it. I get it. I'm different. And so I can definitely sympathize and understand everything I read about it, and because it's such a big topic, and I'm so flattered and honored and happy about the guests who I've got coming up across the course of the 4 episodes in April, culminating in on the last Tuesday of April with Dr. Amy Bender, who was a guest before, and how kind of it all kind of came to fruition. The director of clinical sleep at Cerebra. And Dr. Amy is going to come back and interpret the data which came from 32 nights of me hooked up to the Cerebra in-home polysomnogram. I say that word so cool now. Polysomnogram. It's nothing at all. Day 1 of 30, I was now it's just polysomnogram. I'm there. So yeah, it's been really exciting. Hopefully just not for me getting my results, but just giving an indication of what can happen now thanks to the science. Sleep research hasn't revealed anything, but we're so much closer now to understanding about sleep quality, and what maybe the different stages in sleep are doing, which is what we're going to talk tonight in a fantastic intro with Jessie Cook, who is joining us to take hold of the reins in the front seat and basically try and trim everything he knows about sleep into an hour. Easy. Before I do that, I must thank, first of all, before I forget, it is a new month, but last month was the final part of the CPD focus, and that was with the wonderful Jack March, who came in and told us about all the masqueraders to do with rheumatology. Fantastic episode, so important, really relevant for therapists to play that part again in proper grown-up healthcare, as opposed to just rubbing people to make them feel better, which is nice. It's got a place, but if you really want to help people in pain and injury and be respected by kind of health practitioners, then you need to start recognizing things out of your scope and referring people on. And you know what? It's going to apply to sleep as well, the same as it applies to pelvic health, and all these other kind of areas where we, as the greeter of the person in pain, often because they want to lie down for an hour and get away and just have someone reduce pain like we know we can through touch, we got to ask these questions and say, hey, you know what, from what you told me, you need to go and see so-and-so. And it's just the business model for the future if you want to continue as a soft tissue therapist. I promise you, believe me, I know I don't, but that's what I think anyway. So yeah, thanks so much to Jack March for joining us. And also it was a really special week for Jack March as well, because I don't know how many of you watched Jack Chu, the creator of the Physio Matters podcast, broadcast his final episode of 9 years of the Physio Matters podcast. It was very emotional, bless him. I put a video out there because I was watching it and recorded it, and he was so choked up doing his last. You're listening to them. In fact, it wasn't in a southern accent; it was in a Manc accent, which I won't try. But it's beautiful. 9 years. I mean, the 9 years of Physio Matters podcast has been 9 years of me developing as a clinician, and knowing what I know. And it's gone hand in hand with when I first met Jack, who was gracious enough to admit that when I kind of tweeted what he put about Physio Matters podcast, he was like, wow, this guy's got 4,000 Twitter followers back 10 years ago. And I was like, really? You know, look, fast forward 10 years and now I've got maybe just about 8,000 and he's on something like 17,000. So there's the business side of stuff as well, which I wasn't quite born with. But anyway, so yeah, if you haven't caught up with it, I'm sure episodes will be everywhere. Over 50 guests, 24 hours of podcast. I must admit, I'd love to do that, and I probably will before I die. But hats off to Jack. It was really emotional, and for Jack March for looking after it all. It was really cool. Right, I think that's all the housekeeping I need. So yeah, Sleep Awareness Month on the Sports Therapy Association podcast. So exciting even. Just going to go over here so I can see there. We're going to start off today with Jessie Cook, who, like I say, is going to come in and introduce us to sleep, the silent epidemic, when we're talking all about that. And then maybe we'll be joined as well today, depending on whether she manages to go. She's got a few other commitments going on. Excuse me. But next week's guest, Dr. Olivia Walch, may be joining us, but she'll be with us definitely next week, talking about sleep trackers, which is a massive thing I'm sure a lot of you or your clients are using at the moment to track your sleep quality or quantity. How well does that work? So it's something which will be really important. And then the third week, we got the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Jonathan Charest as well, who's going to talk about specifically sleep injury and performance, which will be really relevant, obviously, for those of you who do work with people who come to you with either injury or pain or performance issues, and also runners who join me for Run Chat Live. You know, it's not just jargon tonight for therapists, it's jargon for humans. Okay, that's what the goal is. And then, like I say, in part 4, final week of April, will be with Dr. Amy M. Bender, who's going to be looking at in-home polysomnogram and how technology is advanced and how everything comes together now, and we can help our clients and refer them to the right people. That's the plan, Stan. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is get rid of that, get comfortable. Try not to. Last week, which is the nightmare, everyone quiet because they were writing stuff down while Jack was talking. This is recorded, guys. You haven't got to take notes. I know what you're like, Glenn's and Claire's and Leslie's. You haven't got to write stuff down. Okay, it's not a lecture happening once. Relax, sit back. You know, just enjoy what we have to say, especially what Jessie has to say, who I'm going to bring up right now. So let's get rid of that, and I will introduce to you Jessie. Coming up now. Hey, dude, how you doing?
Oh, I am well. Great to be here, Matt. Great to talk with you digitally. I was ready to be a listener with that intro. It was great.
I feel a bit guilty, but you know what? I love my guests so much, including you, and I'll give you the same thing next week. I so appreciate you guys giving up your time, and it takes 10 minutes just to, you know, thank you and remind people what it's all about. So thank you for joining me.
No, absolutely. And to all those out there, thanks for finding time to budget this into your lives, wherever you may be. And yeah, major shout out to Matt for the resiliency, for shouldering through his current illness to still put this on. I'm elated to be here today to talk all things sleep. I am extremely passionate about it, and I'm so happy that you're using your platform to draw attention to this critically important, but sometimes unfortunately overlooked behavior.
Excellent, brilliant. Right then, so to start off, I guess the lovely thing is I'm pretty sure no one in the room at the moment knows you. Probably they've started following you, hopefully, if they're wise people, because I know whoever I follow, they should be following. But so tell us a little bit about yourself, Jessie, and how you got into being this passionate about sleep.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm 6 feet tall. I'm just kidding. So I originally grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to school at the University of Arizona for my undergraduate school here in the U.S. And when I was in my junior year, I was trying to really prioritize having the important things in life, a Tuesday and Thursday only class schedule. And a class, Sleep and Sleep Disorders, was being taught by Dr. Richard Bootson, who I didn't know at the time, but later found out is a pioneer of a behavioral treatment for insomnia. And being the hippie undergrad that I was that time, I was like, dreams, those are cool. Subconscious, I like that. I'm going to take this class. And truth be told, my mind was blown. Dr. Bootson, this is back in 2011, opened up my eyes to this vast world of sleep and the implications that has on just about everything from biological functioning at a cellular level all the way up to cognitive ability, psychological stability, physical performance and recovery. Basically, there is no biological process that is unaffected by sleep. And, it started getting me thinking, Matt, sleep is one of those things where everybody does it, similar to breathing, but nobody teaches you how to do it. They basically say, you're supposed to get about 8 hours, go behind this door, close the door, and come out 8 hours later and you feel refreshed. Simple enough. Well, as you're aware and as I'm aware, and I'm sure everyone out there is, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So I joined, that kind of propelled me to join Dr. Richard Bootson's Sleep Research Laboratory in 2012. Spent the year there as an undergraduate research assistant, getting my feet wet with sleep methodology, assisting on some studies with sleep and divorce, sleep and meditation, things like that, getting my foundational skill set for polysomnography. Matt, you killed it with the small polysomnogram. It's a tough word. EEG, electroencephalography, generally gets me. I think that took me about 4 years to nail that one. But I ended up transitioning in 2013 to join Dr. David Plant's laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin. And David Plant is a board certified or a certified licensed psychiatrist, board certified in sleep medicine. And he's now the medical director of Wisconsin Sleep here. So I got kind of this blurred training lens into a psychologist perspective and also a psychiatrist perspective on sleep. And that's kind of where I find myself, is kind of in between there. And I spent the next 4 years working in David's lab and developed some research programs related to excessive daytime sleepiness and disorders of excessive daytime sleepiness, such as narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia, a word that is not as common as a word like insomnia. And Olivia, my colleague, who's just a wealth of knowledge and so vibrant, she'll be on next week to talk sleep trackers, but I've also published a lot on wearable sleep tracking technology, their shortcomings, their abilities, how to use them clinically, in the research domain, and also recreationally. So I'm happy to talk more about that today if people have specific questions there, as I just unfortunately won't be available next week. But I basically become sleep obsessed. And currently I'm in my 5th year of my clinical psychology PhD program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And hopefully one day I'll finish that program up. And I aspire to be a licensed clinical psychologist with a specialty in behavioral sleep medicine, and also keep my kind of research programs alive as well along that way. And recently I've established more of a sleep, we'll talk about the word circadian a little bit later too in the context of sleep, but sleep, circadian, and athletic performance kind of research program growing here, which I know probably has some translation to today's content. And overall, I've drank the Kool-Aid, Matt, is all I got to say. And, I'm consider myself a training clinician. I've spent the last 2 years at the Madison Veterans Affairs training with veterans and helping sleep related to insomnia, CPAP use, nightmare disorder, hypersomnias, circadian rhythm sleep-wake disorders. And I just love the field. I think we do have some major issues in our society that make it really complicated to have sleep health. I don't think it's necessarily an individual issue, but I'm just happy to be here today to hopefully instill some knowledge, provide some foundational knowledge about sleep, its import, the current problems in society, and anything people may have questions about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So it's I've put it up here as people listening to the podcast, you can't see what's going on the screen, but at the bottom I've got like the title here, Sleep, the Silent Epidemic. And you know what? I've only finally reached the age now where I can actually use clickbait, because I hate it. I hate advertising. I love kind of Bill Hicks, was it, who said, anybody here in advertising or marketing, kill yourselves. I love that kind of thing because I really despise, you need to do it, but I don't like it. But when it comes to Sleep, the Silent Epidemic, I decided to use it because although it does sound like clickbait, so it does serve the purpose, and you have to do that to get people's attention, fair enough, especially with social media. How close is it to the truth, and why is it being used so much now? I've just stole it from somewhere else. Why are we regarding sleep as a silent epidemic?
Yeah, and I think it is a very commercially attractive title. We definitely have some issues in society today about media trying to find a clickbaity title to just attract an audience. But I don't think this one is unsubstantiated. I personally like to use the term, we have more of a sleep health crisis, I'm going to avoid the word pandemic now, but we used to use that word prior to our actual pandemic. But I think it's a silent epidemic because nobody's really, we're kind of aware of it, but we're not really talking about it. It's not the forefront of change right now at the societal level, because so many things would have to change for people to be able to have, or for population-wide sleep health. And it is a sleep health crisis. It is truly a major public health issue in that it's been reported and estimated that upwards of 35 to 40% of the population at any given time is reporting insufficient sleep duration based on national recommendations. So generally speaking, for young to middle to older age adults, generally somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of total sleep time per night. I'm going to emphasize the word total sleep time. When we do these epidemiological studies trying to assess the prevalence, the commonality of insufficient sleep across society, we often use a cutoff of 6 hours or less. So even below the recommended level there, we're not getting to 7 to 9. And so that's really concerning that 35% are reporting habitual sleep less than 6 hours a night or equal to 6 hours a night. And to me, the scope of that problem, just insufficient sleep duration, is probably underestimated, because I want to go back to the word total sleep time. These epidemiological studies are often leveraging data collected from a retrospective sleep questionnaire. So if I asked Matt, over the last month, how much sleep would you say you're averaging on a nightly basis? The average layperson in society, from my perspective, is probably reporting the amount of time that they're in bed, that sleep opportunity window. And that is certainly not total sleep time, because we absolutely know for certain that it's going to take time to fall asleep. We know that waking up in the middle of the night is normal, so we're going to have some middle of the night awakenings. And we certainly know that in persons who experience more fragmented or disordered sleep, there's going to be a lot more wake during the sleep period too. So when someone says that they're sleeping 6 hours a night, I'm not entirely certain that's not 5 hours a night when we do a retrospective kind of sleep questionnaire assessment. And that's just one component of sleep health. And so these aren't necessarily all sleep problems. Some of them are consequences, but generally at any given time, about 35 to 50% of society report poor sleep quality. 33 to 35% are often experiencing excessive daytime sleepiness, which is really scary when you start thinking about how many people operate vehicles, fly planes, operate subways, trains, whatever it may be, under chronic insufficient sleep or some untreated sleep disorder that's causing excessive daytime sleepiness. And then along that line, an alarming prevalence of non-restorative sleep complaints and just general sleep disturbances, typically estimated somewhere around 25 to 30% across the population. So the commonality and the implications of poor sleep, whether it be at the acute level, day to day, increase in car accidents, surgical procedure failure due to your surgeon being underslept, all these types of consequences of sleep problems at the acute level, and then also chronic when we start talking about risk for neurodegeneration, risk for cardiovascular disease, risk for metabolic disorders, all sorts of things that skyrocket with poor sleep health. Those two the consequence and the commonality have contributed to this whole sleep health crisis or the silent epidemic that we're experiencing. And it's a major problem, Matt, because society's not changing. And some of the things that are contributing to this issue, whether it be social media, technology, artificial light, stress, work demands, all sorts of things like that, are still here. So the prevalence, meaning the proportion across the population, and the incidence, so the rate of change over time across the population, are going up for all of these sleep problems and sleep disorders. So that's why we have a major problem here. And yes, maybe silent epidemic is a bit of a clickbaity title, but from my perspective, it at least does its service to draw attention to a major problem globally right now, which is poor sleep health.
Yeah, you quoted some fantastic examples there of when we stop and think, oh yeah, imagine how many accidents are caused by people falling asleep at the kind of the wheel of a car or something, or when we get tangible moments. There was a fantastic, I was trying to look it up now, I'm sure I wrote it down. There was a really cool BBC series over here in the UK. I'm not sure if it went outside of the UK, which was based on the memoirs of a comedian who's also a GP, a doctor. I think he was a doctor, might have been a surgeon. I think he was a GP, but he was involved in the NHS, and it was turned into a series, and it was showing, giving an inside look from someone who knows of how sleep deprived so many of the surgeons and the doctors and the nurses are, and how all of them are just doing double shifts and how they're making these decisions. I mean, the series was kind of comedy as well. If you're listening in the to the live show, I think it's called This Is Gonna Hurt, or something. It's called This Is Gonna Hurt, maybe. But there was certain scenes where he was involved, particularly in the maternity suite and stuff, and he was making decisions whether, are we going to go cesarean or not? And there was like tragedy in it because he was losing sleep and he was just hallucinating and all of this stuff. So when people watch that, it's an insight into how dangerous lack of sleep is. But I think also it's so heavily ingrained, isn't it, that if you can get some sleep, it's kind of a benefit. But, you know, that's the icing on the cake. The most important thing is get your stuff done, you know, get your work done. And if you can get maybe up to 8 hours, and that's lovely. But if you can't, we can catch it up, you know, at the weekend. We now know, and you've kind of alluded to that it's not as simple as that. Once you start getting regular under 6 hours, then you're going to fall into some pretty nasty systemic diseases and increase the risk of that. How do we break that? Because the audience here are mainly soft tissue therapists, and the reason I'm doing this is because I want them to be able to start feeling the need to look out for and educate their clients who are coming in pain, which again is going to be very much linked to lack of sleep. But first of all, the therapists themselves and the people watching this need to start changing the chip and realizing, geez, sleep is really important, and I can't rob from sleep to do everything else. I've got to get sleep down and then base everything on top of that. How do we start doing that?
That's a $1 million question, Matt. And I applaud all those that are tuning in today for their interest here, because there is that bidirectional relationship between pain and sleep, where, you know, pain problems are likely to unearth or exacerbate sleep problems, and poor sleep is going to degrade any sort of recovery for an illness, or even leave us more susceptible to injury in the first place. So I think at the surface level is just education. First of all, is showing people the data out there that these things really matter, that, you know, professional athletes are at a X amount of increased risk, if you will, for traumatic brain injury or a concussion due to reporting these types of sleep characteristics. But generally speaking, I think, how do we change at the patient level when we're talking to an individual? For me, this is always a big issue. And I always want to clarify that I'm a training clinician. You know, I'm not licensed yet, and I have to be very careful with that. But when I'm working with somebody, I think it's always critically important to find their why, right? You have to find that motivational reason for change, because sleep, it requires prioritization. Good sleep is not something that just occurs because I budgeted 30 minutes for a wind down period and I, you know, was able to transition into and block off a 7-hour period of sleep window, which is still insufficient. A good night's sleep starts when you wake up in the morning. That's what I tell people. And so your actions and behaviors, your thoughts as well across the day are going to principally contribute to your ability to fall asleep, stay asleep, and your sleep quality at night. So that requires a lot of investment. And so to be that invested with anything, to make those types of changes, to prioritize sleep at the need it's necessary for healthy sleep, requires having a very meaningful why. And so I think that is kind of the big impetus for change, or how you can get an individual to change, is figuring out what is going to unlock their motivation for changing sleep. And it can be, weight loss. It can be quicker recovery. It can be lower risk for injury at kind of this type of domain. It could be better emotional regulation so that you don't have arguments with your partner or your children. It could be the ability to perform more acutely mentally. And whatever it may be, it's about finding the why for that individual that's going to make them turn off their electronics 90 minutes before bed and take a warm shower and drink tea while they stretch or journal or deep breathe, use their diaphragm, meditate, whatever it may be that allows them to drift into the state of sleep rather than find themselves situated in front of the news, situated in front of Netflix, and leave themselves vulnerable to the deleterious effects of this artificial light and the emotional content that is being thrust in front of their face and very challenging to escape. So it really takes a lot of power and strength these days to prioritize healthy sleep. And so I think that ultimately begins with the why. That's, I think, where we do it at the individual level. The population level is much more challenging, right? And I don't know how much time we want to spend on that with this situation, but I do think that there needs to be more conscious awareness to not just the deleterious effects of poor sleep across society, but showcasing the benefits of healthy sleep. That, I think, will lead to legislation change that may narrow the workday or lead to more flexibility there, where people can actually prioritize the things that go into healthy sleep, such as rest, but also physical activity, stress reduction practices, as well as maybe some other alterations to our day-to-day lives when it comes to school start times, the nature of the school day in general, that are contributing to the poor sleep health across the population. Because I think we try and scare with, like, if you sleep for less than 6 hours, more days than not, your risk for diabetes is increased by 290%. And yeah, that's terrifying. But I haven't found that much success even at the individual level, but certainly not the population level, with that type of approach. I think if we come with hey, our workforce productivity increases 300x% when we're well slept, that may lead the people who are responsible for making these changes to have more of a desire to make these changes. And I think that's where we can make the big changes at the population level. But at the individual level, I think it's the same with any other big behavioral change, which is, what's your why?
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's what you say is so true. You only got to look at, like, smoking packets with pictures of what smoking can do to you, and people will still smoke. So the shock factor of this could happen to you, it doesn't really work, does it? So I love that idea of revealing the benefits, which are all around us, of having good sleep, because it's like everything we know. It's inherently, the answers are inside us. We just need to somehow plant the seed so that people go, oh yeah, that makes total sense. We all know what we should be doing, because we're humans, and as we'll probably mention later on, how we should be sleeping is in there. We just got to stop denying it by all the external things which kind of get in the way. But there's some excellent questions coming in here. Now look, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to avoid your questions for 10 minutes, because some of the answers to these questions, without giving away any spoilers, we're going to need to just let Jesse for a second, maybe for 10, not for a second, that'd be too short, for 10 minutes. And this is, like, I know, a huge challenge, really tricky, but go through the basics of, you've already mentioned, for example, circadian rhythms. I want you to mention chronotypes. And I want you to go through very basic language, the different stages of sleep. And if you can, what we think maybe happens within those stages. Yeah, 10 seconds, mate. There you go. In 10 minutes.
Here you go. My blitz version of sleep. I think 10 minutes to be sufficient to give kind of a 10,000 foot view of why sleep's important
Mm.
from an evolutionary perspective, kind of the foundations of sleep health, how we measure sleep, what we're looking for, what those things really mean, and then kind of an introduction to the processes that regulate sleep, which kind of bring in the circadian rhythm and the chronotype components of this as well. So I think I'll do my best, but
I
I
know
think
it's
we can do
hard,
this.
mate, but if anyone can do it, you can.
Thanks. I appreciate the support. And truthfully, as Matt said, I just want to echo that sentiment. These questions look great, and there's a couple that I've already wanted to ask already. And Becky, you didn't have to steal it. You can have it. It's a gift. So anyways, more or less, I always like to think about a function, a behavior from an evolutionary lens to determine whether it's important, necessary, why did it even happen? And from a natural selection standpoint, sleep doesn't make any sense to me at all. We're not searching for a mate. We're not looking for food, and we're vulnerable to predation. And you may be there thinking to yourself, okay, well, maybe it's about not having to look for food because we're not burning as much energy, and restoration. And spot on. There's definitely those things are linked to the function of sleep, which is not fully known at this point, but they're well established as reasons why this may have presented in the evolutionary pipeline. But the question still remains of why 8 hours? Why that much? Because no, it's not 8 hours for everybody, but we'll just say a kind of general rule of thumb. And that seems like a lot of time to be slightly offline, because we're not fully offline. We're still ambiently picking up our environment, and our brains never shut off, but we're definitely disconnected from our truly conscious state of navigating the world, which leaves us very vulnerable to predation, like a lion eating us, right? So from that perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yet, when you think about that and the fact that every animal has some form of sleep-like state, every animal, it's universal. And I'll say sleep-like state because it varies. What sleep looks like in a fly looks a lot different than what sleep looks like in a human. But everyone's got some sort of sleep-like state. And for humans, for mammals, we've developed kind of two main categories of sleep. And one is called non-rapid eye movement sleep, and the other is rapid eye movement sleep. And within humans, we then further distinguish non-rapid eye movement sleep into 3 stages. Non-rapid eye movement sleep 1, 2, and 3. Us sleep people, we're not too complicated. We try and keep it very simple. But each of these things are thought to be distinct components of sleep. And the reality is they're still a little arbitrary. But when we put somebody under a polysomnogram, similar to what Matt's been going through with the tools that Amy's provided, we can assess a multitude of physiological signals. That's the poly component of polysomnogram. Poly, many, somno, sleep, graph measurements, many sleep measurements. And some of that includes your heart rate, some of that includes your breathing, some of that includes your leg movement, muscle tonus throughout the body, and some of it's your brain activity. And what's really important about the brain activity is that's generally how we break down the different stages of sleep. So right now, all of us are experiencing a stage of sleep, if you will, just to maybe a slightly different degree, and that's called wake. And when we're in a wake state, we often have a faster bit of activity. It's a frequency that sometimes is more in the alpha range, which I won't go into too much detail, and sometimes more in the beta range, a little bit faster. But as we start to drift into sleep and drift into these different stages, that brain activity starts to slow down. And we start to see big changes in the electrical signal. And all that really maps onto is that there's different firing rates of the neurons that are in our brain. So more or less, we've categorized brain changes into different stages of sleep. Now, there's definitely a debate in the field of whether these stages are real valid constructs. But for right now, we're just going to assume that there are 5 stages of sleep. There's wake, non-REM 1, non-REM 2, non-REM 3, and REM. And we ebb and flow throughout the stages throughout a night of sleep, something called sleep architecture. And abnormalities in sleep architecture, such as a delayed amount of time to fall asleep, sleep initiation issues, or waking up too frequently throughout the night, or going into REM sleep too early, or not having enough of non-REM 3, are often distinguishing features of disorders and can help explain impairments that people are having with their sleep. And so that's how we kind of measure sleep in laboratory. But when we do that outside of laboratory, we often lose that resolution. Unless, you get some fancy equipment like Matt has, where we have the home polysomnography machines. But I saw a good question in there about wearable trackers, and there's no EEG, brain activity signal, in most of those wearable trackers, right? There are some commercial devices like the Dream headband that measures your EEG, but that lacks some other things. So the measurement changes when we leave the laboratory, but we're still able to categorize sleep reliably based on just maybe your movement and your heart rate, which I actually believe you should save those questions for Olivia, because her math brain is so good that she can answer those questions better than I can of why we can do that. But that's how we take our in-lab measurement and bring it out and try and understand how sleep's operating in the natural world, in your natural environment, because it's kind of unfortunate that we have to bring you into an artificial environment for a single night to get the depth of measurement we want. So that's kind of how we measure sleep and what sleep is. As far as sleep health, I just want to say duration is one component, right? Healthy sleep duration is a component of sleep health, but it's not the only component. And I think the others often get overlooked. I like to describe sleep health through 4 different pillars: duration, continuity, meaning are you sleeping continuously throughout your night, or are you fragmented because you're waking up a couple times, or as I saw, I think from Gary in there, potentially having some early morning awakenings that make it difficult to get back to sleep. Then there's the consistency of your sleep, and this is critical. And I think there was a Twitter question today that already talked about social jet lag tendencies, or the need to recover sleep on the weekend, where our schedules change quite a bit. And so the consistency element's important, which we'll talk about why in a second with our circadian rhythm in particular, but also the depth and quality of your sleep. And so there's 4 different, in my eyes, main domains of sleep health. And I just think the conversation often begins and ends with duration, but there's much more than that. Now, why do we sleep, or how do we sleep? I still think it's a bit elementary, but the best concept we have for describing how one regulates sleep and wake is called the 2-process model of sleep and wake regulation. Why? Because there's 2 biological processes that are involved there. One of which is called the homeostatic process. And you could think of this as your internal sleep need. It's kind of like a hunger cue. And I think it's very easy to conceptualize this one, because the longer you stay awake, the higher your sleep need is. And that keeps increasing over time. So that's often when we're trying to treat sleep disorders at night, like insomnia, we often have people avoid daytime napping because that decreases their sleep need when they want to go to sleep at night, which can manifest as sleep initiation or sleep maintenance problems. And then lastly, there's the circadian rhythm, which you can see as process C. So there's process S, the homeostatic sleep need, and process C, which is our circadian component. And this is something that's increased in attention over the last, I'd say 10, 15 years or so. And basically the circadian rhythm is one's internal, innate, endogenous biological clock that regulates just about every component of physiology. And it's called circadian because it lasts about a day. It's on average about 24.18 hours, so about a day. And in Latin, circa means about or around, and dies means day, so circadian, about a day. And what that does is regulate when key hormones, such as cortisol, a wake-promoting hormone, and melatonin, a sleep-promoting hormone, turn on and off, and myriads of other sleep-related physiology and wake-related physiology. And truthfully, we all kind of vary in our circadian rhythm. There are some people who have longer circadian rhythms than 24.18 hours and actually causes problems for them in society because their sleep schedule keeps shifting later and later. And it's a non-24-hour sleep-wake circadian rhythm disorder. And in turn, so basically the circadian rhythm plays a key role here. And I'm trying to look at the questions at the same time. This is a multitasking nightmare.
Really well.
I know.
We've got 30 seconds left for 10 minutes.
Gotcha. So we all kind of differ. me, myself, I've always been morning tendency. So I call that a circadian preference. So a circadian preference is how I choose to align my day. But I do believe that probably maps onto my chronotype, which is the biology underlying the circadian rhythm. And so we often get kind of convoluted there. Is it somebody's chronotype or is it their circadian preference? Chronotype is often measured in laboratory by assessing when somebody's melatonin levels increase in dim light. But we often don't do that outside a laboratory. So we use proxies, which provide an estimation of somebody's chronotype. But I'm often hard pressed to believe that every person that presents as an eveningness preference has an eveningness chronotype. And so I think when we think about this clinically too, not to get too lost in the weeds, but it's important to understand whether somebody's preference doesn't actually align with their biology. And maybe that's causing the problems. We can come better management there. But to sum it up, the circadian rhythm varies between humans, but it is a universal system that helps organize and regulate our sleep and wake, and it plays a critical role. And when our sleep need is high and our circadian rhythm is in a sleep-like state, that sleep gate right there is when we want to sleep. And we often have very little difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep, and we often get great quality sleep when those two are aligned. When one is out of balance or both are desynchronized, we often have some major problems, and that becomes the focus of intervention.
Fantastic. Bravo, mate. Very good. That was like 12 minutes and you managed to fit it all in there. It's excellent. Really, really well put. And I'm a sucker for like an American accent when it comes to explaining anything. It just sounds so passionate and you use much longer words than we do in England. Really cool. So I needed that because I think what we're going to do now shortly, we're going to bring up Olivia Walch, who's downstairs in the lobby waiting patiently. Then we're going to have a look at some of the questions which you've been asking, because I think to answer some of these questions, Jesse or Olivia might be saying, well, your circadian or your chronotype or the REM stage or the NREM stage or stage 2 or 3 or whatever it's going to be now you know that, then it'll make it easier probably with some of these questions. And I've also got some questions on my phone, which I've been gathering during the day as well. So with that done thing, I think we'll now address some questions and there's loads coming. But first of all, next week's guest has come really early. No, I said she could come. So let's bring up Olivia, who's going to be talking about trackers next week. Hey, Olivia.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks so much.
I'm good.
Coming along.
How are you?
You guys know each other, don't you?
A little bit late. I was like, oh, Jesse, I'll join you. And then I was like, oh, got a conflict. But I'm glad I can be here for this part at least.
Great to meet you.
Jesse, it was fun hearing your explanation. And Matt, great to meet you.
How did he do? I had 12 minutes to basically go through the...
You nailed it. You did great.
We mentioned you a couple of times now because obviously trackables have come up and we've kind of like built you up massively for next week, saying, we'll do that next week with Olivia's here. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take some questions they've been firing through, and now we've had a little bit of, like I say, an intro to circadian rhythms and chronotypes and NREM and the stages of NREM and REM and how they differ and how we measure them with the brain waves and things. Then hopefully that will all make the questions easier to address. So we kind of touched on it already, but especially as Olivia is here now, Becky mentioned, here we go, Fitbits or any type of other wearable trackable. We're not picking on one particular brand here, but yeah, Fitbits is a method of monitoring sleep. Or you're just like a journalist, Becky. Helpful or harmful? Look at that alliteration, cornering them into But anyway, what do you think to that? Olivia, what do you reckon? I know it's tricky.
I mean, there is this phenomenon that gets talked about at sleep conferences called orthosomnia, which is people are so stressed about their sleep tracking that it's making their sleep worse. And what my postdoc advisor always said is like, the way you know you've got a sleep problem is that you feel bad about your sleep. Like just, you don't feel good when you wake up in the morning, and not because Fitbit gave you a 58. Like if you feel fine and Fitbit gave you a 58, fine matters more. And so I think it's very specific to the individual. I personally love Fitbits, but if you find that they're giving you real anxiety, then like absolutely lay off the wearable and lay on the pillow. I tried to end that in a snappy way.
Very cool. Jesse, you got some competition here. Right, what do you say, Jesse?
I was
how do you feel?
I was going to say, do I even have to follow up after that mic drop? First of all, so great to see you as always, Olivia. Thank you for bringing your vibrant personality and expertise onto the show and help me out here. Olivia's spot on. Orthosomnia is a real thing. Some people are more susceptible to than others. We're not entirely certain who is most susceptible yet. Obviously, some clear patient characteristics and phenotypes stand out. Those who are more prone to obsessive tendencies or anxiety may be more susceptible to the deleterious effects or the negative effects of wearables. And ultimately, Olivia's right. We should base our understanding of our sleep quality largely on our subjective experience, which can be hijacked by the output from these devices. There's actually science out there that's shown that sham feedback, so fake feedback about poor sleep quality, will lead people who objectively got good sleep quality to rate their sleep quality as poor. So we must know that these devices are getting better, because I personally have a wearable. I enjoy wearables. I think they have utility, but they're still flawed in some ways. So it's understanding what to do with your tracker. And for me, I think it's a helpful tool of understanding kind of my consistency to my schedule. I think they do a good job with that. They're really solid at estimating sleep duration. I think that's their best characteristic at this point. But as far as basing your life and your anxiety and your worry on how long they're reporting you fell asleep, how many times you woke up during the night, and your percentage of deep sleep or REM sleep, right now they're still very, very poor. I wouldn't say poor. They've improved, but they still have notable error there that can lead you offline. So I think generally they can be very helpful tools, especially, when you get to Jonathan's discussion in week 3 about sleep and injury and performance as someone who might be vulnerable to a risk for a concussion per se, getting a lens in that information, but they can certainly be harmful, as Olivia unpacked, due to kind of the orthosomnia and, over fixation on sleep. It's this delicate balance of prioritization without fixation, and delicate is the right word.
Excellent. Great answers. I'm glad you two agree on that. I think Amy as well, Dr. Amy Bender, said the same kind of thing. Great to start a conversation, but you've got to know the limits of it and listen to yourself. What did you say there, Olivia? What was it? Lay off the device and lay on your pillow, wasn't it? That's brilliant.
Yeah. Trademark Olivia.
Very nice. Yeah, that's
Do not
cool.
steal.
It's made me forget the one that Jesse came up with early on. Now it's just gone. I haven't got the headspace now, but Jesse, it said something which was so profound as well, but it's just been pushed out by that. Sorry.
I say doubtful. That was as good as it gets. So
so there you go, Becky. There obviously we'll be talking about trackables more next week. But yeah, people listening on One Chat Live, don't let we've already talked so much. Anyone who's had conversations with me in consultations, we've talked about reliance on Fitbit and all of the technology to calculate your cadence and all the step stride rate and all this stuff, and you're missing the low-hanging fruits because you're getting dazzled by the technology, which is invented to make money, which is a little bit cynical. Obviously there's a love in it as well to help people, but it's made there to keep you looking at it and dependent on it and made storing it easy. So but anyway, we'll talk about that next week. I hope that was useful, Becky, as an introduction to it. Claire Walker, I'm going to do these in order, so they're going to come out a little bit randomly, and what we'll try and do, where are we? 11 minutes. What we'll see, shortish answers. So we start off with any sleep advice during menopause.
Yeah, I'll dive in real quick and see what I can do, because truthfully, it's not an area of expertise, but I've worked with a couple people who have gone through this experience. And my best advice is to really focus on just your global sleep health habits. Really having consistency, really avoiding alcohol use. I do know that the change in estrogen often can lead to sleep problems during this period. So it may even be necessary to have some sort of like estrogen replacement therapy that is sometimes recommended. But there, unfortunately, Claire, isn't, to my understanding, a lot of, kind of very simple, universal, specific advice for this kind of handling sleep during menopause. So I think it's just going to be really focusing on the other foundations of what leads to sleep health.
Olivia, to add?
Really just agree. And this is something that I could say at any point in time to any conversation or question that comes up. But something that, like, in theory should really help is stopping thinking about dark at night as optional. So as much as possible, if you wake up in the middle of the night, don't turn on the lights. Don't especially turn on overhead lights. Like before we had artificial lighting, it wasn't optional. Night was night and that was it. And I think making it optional has made it so it's really easy to have sleep problems exacerbate themselves. You wake up, you turn on the lights, you disrupt your body's clock, you have more sleep problems. So just as much as you can, and I know it's boring to be in the dark if you wake up, like just try and avoid things that matter to your circadian clock, like light exposure.
It's interesting because, I mean, to start off, it's tricky because I've suffered from poor sleep. So I, by nature, know that if I wake up and my wife tries talking to me, expecting me to say anything, I'm just going to attack her because I'm like, by making me talk and making me think, and then I'm not going to get to sleep again. If there's a hint of light, if she leaves the door open at 6 or 5:30 in the morning, I will be awake and can't get to sleep again because that crack of light just stirred me. I need my darkness. So I'm really sensitive already to the needs to make sure I stay asleep, which kind of helps if I'm talking to people and trying to, but with all of these questions, I think if you look up 12 tips to improving your sleep quality, I think there's a particularly good, which is one that Matthew Walker talked about. Is it the NH, was it? I can't remember what the name of the organization is now, National Health Institute or something. But if you look up 12 tips, there's so many things which I think people could improve, regardless of whether it's menopause or training for a marathon or whatever the situation is. There's going to be extra details, but when you look at things which people could do, like I love the one, don't have a clock which is saying the time in your face every time you open an eye, because you're just going to get anxious about it. Put a cover over it. The alarm will go off if you need an alarm when it's time to wake up. Why wake up and go, oh, it's 2 o'clock. Oh, it's 2:30, you know? So that's just one of 12 tips, which I think can help everybody. And they're not obvious because unless you read them, you know. What are some other tips? You mentioned already the dark. You've mentioned, I think, a couple of the other ones. But what are some other ones which people could do quite easily to help improve their quality? What comes to mind?
I would say start thinking about your sleep when you wake up, in the sense that actions you take early in the day affect your sleep 16 hours later. So for instance, you really want to try and get light during the day. It's not just a matter of avoiding it at night. You want to get a ton of it during the day so that you're really sending the signal to your brain that day has happened. And so then when night rolls around, it's like, oh, day has happened. Night is here. You can think of it almost as like being on a swing and like trying to get a really big like amplitude going, like a really big swing. And the way you do that is somebody pushes you in one direction and then they stay out of your way on the back swing when you're coming back. And getting light at night is kind of like sticking your arm out while somebody's swinging backwards and interrupting their rhythm, interrupting their swing. And similarly, not getting enough light in the day is like having a really weak push. It's like, here it is. And you're not going to get a really nice swing. But what that big amplitude helps is it helps you swing into sleep. So the light exposure you get during the day is going to help you sleep tonight.
Very cool. And that's reminded me actually what Jesse said earlier on, your good night's sleep starts when you wake up. I think that was probably it.
Oh, you already said
Yeah, he was in there. But no, it was good because you just reminded me. So he's back there now. Light will show up again and again, hasn't it? As we talked about circadian rhythm and how the effect, not just light, temperature and stuff as well, but excuse me, a massive player, isn't it, in helping your body naturally grow sleepy, wake up, stay awake and that sort of stuff. Sorry, Jesse, I interrupted you. You were going to say something, I believe.
No, you're good. And Olivia hit the big thing to jump off with is to get that circadian rhythm regulated and off to a great start. We want a ton of light exposure in the morning and sustained across our daytime hours, ideally natural. But if we can't, because we're in a normal climate or whatever, circadian light boxes are a good replacement and recommended. But even if it's cloudy, you're still getting sunlight if you go outside. I think physical activity in the morning is also critically important. And those two fall into what we call Zeitgeibers or clock entrainers, because they help organize our circadian rhythm. So if you can get up and get active in the sunlight, you're doing a great job already. As we move through the day, things will change a little bit. We really want to be mindful of our caffeine consumption in the afternoon. I think a simplified rule of cutting off at noon is a good place to start. And I even think if we went a little bit earlier of 10 or 11, it's not a bad idea either. We all vary in how we process and metabolize caffeine, but generally speaking, it's about 6 to 10 hours of half-life. So if you have that cup of coffee in the afternoon, you may still be able to fall asleep, but it may actually interfere with your depth of sleep. And it may be still circulating there and not allowing you to get the deeper stages. And then we also want to be really, really mindful of another term that's near and dear to Olivia's heart because it has the word circadian in it, the circadian dip. We're all vulnerable at about, anywhere between 12 and 3 p.m., depending on our circadian rhythm, to having a little bit of a downtick, a lethargy. And a lot of people chalk that up to digestion after lunch, but that's kind of a misperception, faux pas, if you will. It's generally this just kind of dip in our circadian rhythm as it starts to transition from cortisol production ramping to plateauing to decreasing, and then the kind of seesaw effect of melatonin starting to increase in the afternoon to transition to our sleep phases. So be very careful around that period because that's when people are very vulnerable to eating having a caffeinated drink, taking a prolonged nap, which could show up and interfere with our sleep quality at night and leave us more likely to perpetuate that behavior. Or have like a high sugar candy bar that leads us into lethargy and crash, and maybe we don't do our physical activity or exercise. That's also key for sleep. And then the big ones too is avoiding large meals before bed. We're starting to get a better understanding of how meal timing and the composition of meals has an effect on our sleep ability or quality. And really, 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 really budget enough time to wind down. We're not robots. We don't have an on and off switch. And basically, as Olivia said, we start up with our plane ramping up, and then we start to fly, and we're at this altitude throughout our day. And at some time, we got to come down, and we can't just drop out of the sky. So we really need to land our plane. And I make the analogy of putting your tray table up and your seat back up and getting everything ready to go for landing. And the more time you give yourself, the smoother that landing and transition is into sleep. And the last thing I'll say is just if you have a propensity for worrying, or your head hits that pillow and it's flooded with anxious thoughts, carve out a time much earlier in the day, maybe noon, 1, 2, to constructively worry, to think about the problems that might come into your head at night and address them ahead of time. Because hand up here, when my worrying happens when I'm in bed, that's not constructive. That's catastrophic. It's like, okay, I'm not going to finish this program. I'm never going to have a degree. I'm not going to have a job, and I'm going to be homeless. And that's not going to be helpful for my sleep, nor is that realistic. So those are kind of like big picture things we can do across our day.
Massive. So much information, and that's great. And there's so much we could talk about each of these individual points. And hopefully that's the idea why we're doing Sleep Awareness Month. I know, again, from experience, I read it and I'm like, yeah, well, that's what I've done all my life because I know I have to do it. If you're anxious in bed, get out. Don't stay in the bed fretting because it just circles round. And that's what I call the carousel, where suddenly, literally I'll get to a state where I'm actually feel like I'm having a bit of a panic attack and I'm breathing and I have to get to the bathroom and splash water on my face and kind of like, because I've just stayed in bed for that, what feels like an hour, just going, I'm not going to sleep, I'm not going to sleep. And I learned at a younger age, get up, move around, have something, a little snack or something, don't let bed place become the enemy. It just winds you up. So
you're gonna condition yourself like a Pavlovian dog to view the bed as a place of wakefulness or frustration or anger and anxiety, which perpetuates sleep problems, rather than viewing as a place of this warm, tranquil, calm, inviting place where we fall asleep and stay asleep. And so that's the other problem with staying in bed worrying.
How you guys for like 10 minutes more? I don't know what you're up to, or
there's a lot of good questions. I'm okay.
Oh, there's so much, mate. I want to go through.
I'm good.
You mentioned I had a couple of questions online earlier today when I kind of invited people, the napping things. You mentioned the kind of that little dip, which people sometimes attribute to after lunch. That kind of times in with this idea of the natural biphasic nature, which humans probably once had until modern industry came along, where we should be taking a nap when that dip naturally happens, but it mustn't be too long. Are you kind of in agreement with that, or do you think there's a danger of taking a nap and it not helping when it comes to nighttime sleeping? How do you know whether to take one or not?
I think it's really complicated. And I think it really depends on whether we're treating sleep. If someone's got a focal sleep complaint and they're trying to improve their nocturnal sleep at night and they work in a traditional 9-hour or 8-hour shift job in this kind of modern society where the ability for kind of structured or scheduled rest or nap during the daytime is less viable, then trying to avoid daytime napping to improve your nocturnal sleep ability and quality so you can function across the whole day is critical. Yet, I'm not phobic to daytime napping. I, again, Matt, like to come at this from an evolutionary perspective, and I align with you. I think we generally came from climates that were really, really hot during the middle of the day. And it probably makes a lot of sense that it wasn't productive for us to be out in those conditions. And so we probably took to safety and recovery, kind of that siesta, that circadian dip that occurs, to maybe conserve energy and also not leaving ourselves vulnerable to prey out there that are not as interfered with because of the heat. So I think it is a natural indicator of what life probably looked like, in our evolutionary underpinnings. So I think there's a cultural component to this as well. So there's no universal answer here. My father, who may or may not be listening, he's reached the age of retirement. And when you get to the age of retirement, there is less structure to your days, less demands, less needs. And so when I'm working with a client who's at that stage, I'll inform them that I think it's best if we try and prioritize not napping for your sleep at night. But if it's not a problem for you to sleep 1 to 2 hours, then just know that may interfere with your ability to fall asleep at a consistent time each night. And if you're not experiencing distress with that, that's okay to me. And we still want to accumulate somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of total sleep time across our 24-hour period.
Olivia, take it away.
I really don't have anything to add. I mean,
I'm sorry.
Naps, do you go for it? I mean, it's lovely to... So I love it when an answer depends on the individual. And to tell you the truth, when it comes to health with somebody, it's always going to depend on the person who's in front of you. But I've read studies that have showed, and it's tricky, isn't it, with research, but studies have showed that as the tradition of siestas moved away from hotter countries like Spain and Greece, then they've kind of either correlation or causation seen an increase in the amount of cardiovascular disease and a decrease in the life expectancy of males. Do you think there is an argument for correlation there, or is it just it's going with the sign of the times? Is it possible that we're better off actually, if we can and healthy, have that nap during the day, or again, is it going to depend?
I think it's totally believable. Because that nap is counting towards your total sleep count. And I think cutting it often isn't compensated for with more sleep at night. So with appropriate disclaimers about correlation and causation, I think there's a story that you could believe as really plausible there.
I think the exciting thing is, and again, thinking of people in the audience and listening to the podcast to our therapists and having people come, we've talked so much about the joy, and it should be a joy of the jigsaw of looking the person in front of you and putting all the bits together and asking more and more questions and setting an ambience where they're going to open up and tell you things. This is where you can make recommendations, like, for example, and this pertains to this question here, like Gary's talking about, how does he phrase it? It was a lovely way. A man of a certain age, so Southern, a man of a certain age who's going to have to get up during the night. That doesn't have to be something to catastrophize and worry about, but it may mean that make sure other things are in place so you can get back to sleep again, doesn't it? Everyone's going to have a reason to disturb the night, whatever it is. It's kids or whatever, a man of a certain age. There's going to be stuff going on, isn't there? So it's about making sure that everything else is as good as possible so you can just go back to sleep again, I guess. Yeah,
a very global perspective.
Yeah, and you have permission to not be perfect. That's another thing about being human, right? Is there is no such thing as perfect sleep health. We don't even really know truly what is each element of sleep health yet from a quality, quantity perspective, those types of things. So yeah, I think that's very fair. And looking at the global, get the other ducks in order. And I also wanted to draw attention to the kind of second half of Gary's comment there about the conditioning component of lifestyle and how that can influence our kind of sleep issues or our sleep habits downstream. This goes back to something that is Olivia is an expert on, and I kind of unpacked when it comes to the circadian rhythm. But we can develop kind of alterations in our rhythm from prolonged exposure to different kind of sleep-wake schedules. So if you're on a third shift lifestyle for a long period of time, I don't know what long is, Olivia, really, that's necessary to really leave a lasting mark on your circadian rhythm, but that can often dysregulate your circadian rhythm where it will take time with structured therapy and organization to then stabilize it and return it to the kind of traditional structure that you want. So if you're going from, say, a third shift to a traditional shift, you may have major difficulties doing that because that underlying biology has changed. So it makes so much sense, Gary, that your kind of long-standing exposure to that lifestyle probably shaped your biology, your chronotype, and also maybe your preference to be more aligned with that type of sleep-wake characteristic. Olivia, do you have something to add to that at all?
I mostly just wanted to piggyback off your comment on timing, which is that I think you can't think of sleep as like a one-day thing. Like if you're trying to do a sleep intervention, you're trying to like recover from sleep debt, like that's multiple days or weeks. I'm running a trial right now where we're putting people on a circadian intervention to look at their fatigue, and we see a difference, but it takes like 2-3 weeks for the control group and intervention group to really separate. And then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And a lot of people, I think, burn out after like 1 or 2 nights of trying something and are like, it didn't fix my sleep. When the way to think about sleep, I think, is not in isolation. Think of it like walking. This is another analogy here. You're not thinking about walking step by step. You're thinking about it as like the rhythm. And you're not like, oh, I took 3 small steps, better take a big step. Like if you're hyper focused on your next step, you're not going to have a good walk. Like it's going to be this really arrhythmic pace that you have going. And you're probably also not going to enjoy the experience very much. Whereas if you instead think about sort of the rhythm of sleep, like the rhythm of walking, and okay, you might stumble sometimes, but then you get back on the horse and you're really focused on this regularity aspect and this rhythmic aspect, I think you'll really start to see dividends be paid.
Great advice. I think we'll wait until episode 3. There were some questions from Angie Jackson, who was a guest during the CPD month, regarding teenagers and athletes, and that's a whole interesting section which maybe we'll talk about with Jonathan when it comes to the sports performance. That saves me from having to get through 4 questions, but to do with chronotype changing during our lifetime, because it's kind of connected, isn't it? Chronotype does move around as we get older, which means the patients we see, if we're aware of that as therapists, then we can kind of generalize, but kind of think, right, this person, this stage of life, this is probably going on, whether it's teenage athlete or even very senior athlete of some form. So I like this comment from Nikki, though, because it kind of goes back to that light thing, which is also so important. Nikki Mansfield, I'll read it for those listening to the podcast. Nikki Mansfield says, if I cannot drop off to sleep, I have advice to get up and do something else till I'm tired again. How do I do this if I need to avoid switching on the light during the night? Sounds like a silly question, doesn't it? You know, and I hate this idea of Nikki stepping on some plug or something, or because they're determined not to. But again, the light's so important, isn't it? When we say don't switch on a light or try not to avoid bright lights in the evening, there's some lovely ways with mood lighting and different lights you can buy now. So what is some of the recommendations with regards to this question? What sort of light could you use or buy to allow you to move around without instigating that wake up process? Olivia.
Yeah, it's a great question, and challenging.
No.
I have commandeered our whole home. My partner may not like this at this point. She was phobic of these at first, but we have night lights throughout our home. This way I can go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and not have to turn on a main light and not have to worry about my safety. So we want to just be mindful also. Ideally, we don't turn on any lights, but sometimes we really got to have something. So from a safety perspective. So limiting the amount of light is really important. So I think don't be fearful of having night lights. I also had to grab this guy. This is one of my favorite tools if I'm having a middle of the night awakening where I can't return to sleep. And I got like these little lamps here so that I can read on an actual book, whatever those are. And I can move throughout my house that way without having it directly shined into my eyeballs where it's going to disrupt my circadian rhythm and send a wake signal. So I think there's some little novel devices commercially available these days that can help with that type of problem. And I think the other elephant in the room, and then I'll pass the mic to Olivia here, Nikki, is, it's more of a modern issue of why are we craving electronic use right now? Can't we do other things such as reading, stretching, journaling, breathing, all sorts of things like that, that don't need to turn on the tablet or the TV. But I will say, I'm not immune to those behaviors as well. And I think just trying to reduce the likelihood of doing it, I think that also begins with setting yourself up for success. When I'm working on stimulus control therapy with somebody, which is what you're describing here, I have them bring their journal, their book, all their stuff to that environment that they're going to go to. So they're not scrambling around. So they don't have to turn on a light to find things. So I think set yourself up for success. Get your yoga mat out, whatever it may be, and turn a negative that is the sleep disruption, that is the sleep irritation, that is the sleep frustration into a positive. Go pet your animal that you've been neglecting because life is too fast, whatever it may be. In our home, we call it visiting John's lair. That's our cat, and he sleeps on the couch. So that's what we call our middle of the night awakening approach. But I just think, try and explore less electronic-based interventions. And if you have to, really just try and set yourself up for success by limiting the exposure.
Yeah, I mean, all of that, and just reiterating that it's an optimization problem. Do not hurt yourself as you try and get somewhere out of bed because I told you to stay in the dark. Get enough light so you do not injure yourself. And Olivia, the person, not Olivia, the scientist, is really fond of audio. I'll squint at my screen for 2 seconds, start playing something, turn it off, and then be in the dark again. And that can really help me if I'm out of bed, so I'm not associating bed with not being able to sleep, get back into the sleep mode while treating dark as much as possible as not optional, as something that really is the rule of my house when the sun's down.
Very cool. Very nice. Oh, I wish we had another hour. We don't. So much there, but I think I managed to cover quite a lot of the questions, hopefully. And in all honesty, other people I remember were talking about, please ask what to do if you're taking a medication which is prone to waking you up, which again, kind of maybe it's looking at the other low-hanging fruits and realizing, look, I'm in this situation where I have to take this medication, unless you do contact your GP and see if there's an alternative, because sometimes that's an option, isn't it? But it's realizing I'm going to wake up because of this or that. Let's just put everything else in place, and because no one's going to have a perfect night's sleep, like you said. There's always going to be things because we're humans. So hopefully, some of the questions I haven't got through tonight, considering those 12 tips, or depending where you look, of how to get sleep, there's so many little ways there which you can change things, which I'm sure, like I say, you won't have thought of. Just stumble upon these ideas. I've got a clock again because I suffer. I've got a really cool clock which don't think it costs much because it's for my birthday and I don't spend as much money anymore, but it just increases light in the morning gradually because I need a blackout at night time. But then the idea is it's nice to wake up with the natural light. So unless you've got automatic curtains on a some kind of expensive Google plugin thing, then this light will just come on gradually. I set it a certain time to emit light, and you know what, it's pretty cool. I mean, I love waking up without my alarm clock, which is another topic we'll talk about, because what worse way to start a day than with a straight away from sleep to it's just crazy, isn't it? From a very young age, I've never had an alarm. I found out when I was about 9, I would put on some nursery rhyme because I prefer to wake up as soon as I could actually have music. Wake up to some Chopin rather than some kind of why. So again, there's lots of things which, unless you've suffered from poor sleep and you've stumbled upon because of that, they'll surprise you as to how you can improve your sleep quality. So gang, thank you so much. It's gone way too, like I said, I'd keep here forever, but I can't. But I appreciate you've got stuff to do because you're not even in the UK. What time is it where you are? 3, 4 or something? Or where are you?
Yeah, it's the afternoon.
I was going to say it's easier for us than you, I think, right?
No, I'm a night owl. If I could stay here until 2 in the morning, I'm in my element. I'm staring at some nice blue LED. It's fantastic. It's great. I'm not. I've got an app on here. I've got to download an app, just take out the blue light. But thank you so much. I think we've achieved our mission of introducing some ideas. I'm hoping if you listen to the podcast, then hopefully it has generated some more questions. And that's why we're doing Sleep Awareness Month on the Sports Therapy Association podcast, videocast, and One Chat Live, because the conversation will continue with a lovely segue, because Olivia, who we never even introduced, we just kind of dragged up here from the lobby, is the CEO of Arcascope, and also PhD in applied mathematics, which is pretty impressive. I mean, clinical psychology, no disrespect, but applied mathematics. I mean, that's just like, you've got to be a total absolute masochist. But yeah, anyway, so when it comes to trackers and stuff, that's going to be all next week. And Olivia's already showed some fantastic use of metaphors and idioms to get points across. It's going to be very exciting. Wonderful domination of the English language. So that'll be next week. But as far as today goes, I think that hopefully wraps it up. If you've got any emails or further questions, especially for Olivia knowing it's going to be tracking next week, trackers, then matt@thesta.co.uk, or social media. Now you've met these guys and you can see how lovely they are, then follow. For example, Jesse on social media, Sleep and Sports. Yeah.
Yep. That's perfect. That's my Twitter feed.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm not really active elsewhere.
No. And you've got loads of exciting things coming up as well. And thanks to meeting you, some lovely ventures coming up. Just give a little shout out, because I'm very excited by what's the latest one coming up? The new podcast. Well, I think you've got about 12 podcasts only coming up. What's the one? The sleep, what was it? The Wave? No, what was it called?
Yes. So shameless plug here. I'm launching my own content channel with a collaborator. He hosts the Sleep Junkies podcast, which I highly recommend. And we are starting our own content channel called The Slow Wave. If you search Welcome to the Slow Wave on YouTube, you'll probably find our welcome video we just put out yesterday. And we're going to produce content each week. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to reach out to me at Sleep and Sports on Twitter. I think you'll find I generally respond, and I'm happy to address any questions. But you're in great hands with Olivia. Ask her about the Apple Watch and how she can hack it.
Hey. And a really nice video as well. I'll make sure that goes to the show notes as well, because that video you guys made. Did Olivia just go? What did you say? She's off to hack an Apple Watch. But yeah, that video you guys made was beautiful. If that's a sign of what's coming, then fantastic. Really nice production. Really cool. I'll make sure that goes in the show notes. And then Olivia, who just disappeared from our screen, maybe clicked the wrong button. She will be here next week. Not as active on social media because maths is her thing. So obviously the two just don't tally. Brain can't handle both of those at the same time. But we'll give you links for Olivia's work next week as well. Right, conscious of the time.
And if you want to just a quick primer to Olivia. Conveniently, she's very easy to track down on the interweb. If you go to oliviawalch.com, WALCH, she has a really polished website and also shows her creative side as well. It's really impressive.
Oh, we thought it was something you said, Olivia. What was that about? You just disappeared. Did you?
I did that to build suspense.
I'm sorry about that.
When I returned,
we just said if people want to read about you or contact you, Jesse was kind enough to mention your website where there's a load of information. Just repeat it again for me. The website, is it Olivia Walch?
OliviaWalch.com.
It's nothing. It's not even that complicated.
Easy enough. Yeah, she makes it too easy.
Okay, wicked. Thank you everyone who's joined us live. If you're listening to the podcast, which I will try as hard as much as can to put out tomorrow, and you think, I want to join these people live next week, they sound great, then it will be Tuesday at 8 o'clock. That's UK time, which is GMT +1. So yeah, if you wanted, then you can join us. Everyone's welcome. And we'll continue and pick up the conversation with Olivia with regards to sleep trackers next Tuesday. You guys stick around so I can thank you personally, but all of you who have joined us live, I'm now going to end the show. So thanks again for joining us, and take care for each other. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.